There comes a moment in every man's life when the noise must stop, when the explanations dry up, when the desire to be understood dies its final death, and in its place a fire awakens. Not loud, not chaotic, but sovereign. Because there is a kind of power you can only unlock when you stop asking the world for permission to exist. That's the moment you begin to ascend. Not socially, not professionally, but spiritually, psychologically, ontologically. You start to walk differently. You start to move from conviction, not consensus. And the chains of justification, the need to explain your evolution to those who've never tasted transformation, begin to fall away. You see, every time you explain yourself to someone who has not earned the right to witness your process, you leak power. Every justification is a transfer of your authority to someone who was never built to hold it. But we've been conditioned, haven't we, to make ourselves small so others feel safe, to dim the glow of our clarity so the blind won't feel left behind, to put disclaimers before our desires just so no one calls us arrogant. But let me say it now, with fire in every word. Your life is not a group project. Your vision is not a democracy. And your becoming is not up for debate. The moment you stop explaining, you start reclaiming your time, your silence, your energy, your frequency. Because explanation is often a symptom of inner doubt. It's the wound itself looking for reflection in others to validate what the soul already knows. But the truth is, most people don't want your explanation. They want your limitation. They want you to stay small so they don't have to stretch. They want you to keep defending your moves so they don't have to question their stillness. And in this modern world, the ones who explain the least ascend the fastest because they've learned to operate from psyphoria, that sacred state of inner authority, when your soul is louder than the noise, when your knowing becomes heavier than your needing, when you no longer try to win arguments because you've already won alignment. Carl Jung knew this war. He said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But what he didn't say was how many versions of yourself must die for that to happen. And each of those deaths feels like isolation, like being misunderstood, like being judged for becoming a shape they can no longer recognize. But that's the cost. That's the price of ascension. Not applause, not affirmation, but aloneness. And in that sacred aloneness, the soul does its real work, not on stage, but in shadow, in silence, in the dark furnace where your identity is forged. And every part of you that once explained, defended, apologized, is burned into clarity. So stop defending your boundaries. Hold them. Stop explaining your shifts. Live them. Stop narrating your growth to people who only hear what fits their box. Transcend the box, because the higher you go, the quieter you become. Not from weakness, but from density. Because true power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't plead. It doesn't ask. It simply moves. And when you move like that, when your presence becomes heavier than your explanations, people feel it. They might not understand it, but they'll never forget it. That's ascension. That's the new currency. And it begins when you stop giving people access to the drafts of your becoming and start showing up as the final version, unapologetic and unexplainable, because the final version of you is not here to be digested. He is here to be difficult to explain, to disrupt, to destabilize the smallness in others simply by existing as proof that transformation is not only possible, it is necessary. And when that man speaks, he does not raise his voice. He raises his standard. He doesn't react to noise, he redirects energy. He doesn't repeat himself because what he embodies speaks louder than words ever could. You see, when you stop explaining, you force people to decide. Decide whether they're willing to meet you at your altitude or remain in the comfort of gravity. You give them a choice, rise or retreat, but you no longer carry them across the threshold, because carrying others was how you used to feel worthy. Now you know. The only weight you were ever meant to bear was your own greatness. And greatness doesn't explain itself. It doesn't justify its pace. It doesn't dilute its power for palatability. It arrives. It dominates by design. And yes, it is lonely. But that loneliness, that edge of the cliff silence, that's where the voice of your highest self finally becomes clear. It says, stop breaking yourself into smaller pieces for people who only know how to digest crumbs. Stop pausing your evolution so others won't feel left behind. Stop narrating your climb to people who are still building a ladder out of excuses. Because this climb, this internal psychological spiritual ascension, it isn't for the comfortable. It's for the committed. It's for those who would rather be misunderstood at the top than fully accepted at the bottom. And when you make peace with that, when you embrace the silence of sovereignty, your movements start to feel different. You no longer ask, what will they think? You ask, does this honor who I am becoming? You no longer ask, will they approve? You ask, will I respect myself in the mirror tomorrow? You no longer ask, what if I lose them? You ask, what if I lose me trying to keep them? This is the shift, the quantum leap, the silent fracture that cracks your old self wide open and makes room for your next identity to emerge unshaken. You are not here to be explained. You are here to be embodied, and embodiment is terrifying to those who have only ever lived in theory. That's why they'll doubt you. That's why they'll whisper. That's why they'll try to pull you back with passive disapproval and quiet sarcasm. But by then, you'll be gone. Not physically, but spiritually unavailable to anything beneath your new frequency. You will walk among them, but you will no longer belong to them, because you no longer belong to the version of you they once knew. That version is dead. And in his place now walks a man who doesn't beg to be seen, because he sees himself fully, fiercely, finally. And when you finally see yourself, you stop needing to be seen. You stop auditioning for approval. You stop shrinking your truth so others can sit more comfortably in theirs. You realize you don't owe anyone an explanation for a fire they were never willing to build, because they weren't with you in the silence. They weren't with you in the nights where you rip pieces of yourself off like dead skin, each one a lie you once believed. They weren't with you in the psychological warfare you fought every morning just to get up and not quit. So why, now that you've risen from your own ashes, should you explain the shape of your wings to those still terrified of flying? When you stop explaining, you reclaim your altitude. You rise without the weight of translation. You ascend without the need to soften your edges. And suddenly something strange happens. The world shifts. People begin to respect you, not because you've convinced them, but because you've stopped needing to. They feel it. They feel your alignment. They feel your absence where you once overextended. They feel your silence where you once begged to be understood. And they either rise to meet you or they fall away. Not as punishment, but as consequence. Because your evolution is not a threat. It's a mirror. And most people don't hate your change. They hate what your change reveals about their refusal to grow. But that's no longer your concern. You've traded concern for clarity. You've traded guilt for God mode. You've traded the crowd for the crown, because real kings do not explain the castle they're building. They build it brick by brutal brick, quietly, unapologetically, until one day the skyline is shaped by their vision, and the same people who once questioned their path now ask for the blueprint. But by then, you won't be explaining. You'll be ascending. And they'll either learn by example or watch from below. That's the truth. That's the path. That's the price. And that is the freedom waiting for the man who finally stops explaining and starts becoming untouchable. Because untouchable isn't about being unreachable. It's about being undisturbed, unaffected by noise, unmoved by projections, unbothered by the smallness that once baited you into arguments, guilt, and shrinking your voice. There's a stillness that comes when you've paid the price of transformation in full. A silence that isn't empty, it's full of knowing. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to post your wins. You don't need to correct those who misunderstand you. Because once you become the standard, you no longer explain it. You live it. You embody it. And the world adjusts. They may not like your distance, but they'll respect your boundaries. They may not understand your vision, but they'll feel your conviction. They may not support your silence, but they'll watch your results in awe. This is when you rise beyond the need for external proof. This is when you become inevitable. Because every time you rise without explaining, every time you evolve without apologizing, every time you walk away without defending your exit, you become more dangerous to every lie that once lived inside you. You become more powerful to every soul who still remembers how to listen. And you become legendary not by declaration, but by demonstration. And so now the invitation is clear. Walk quietly, completely, with a frequency so high that words become unnecessary, with a presence so whole that even your silence speaks volumes, with a self-respect so deep, the world begins to orbit you, not because you explained, but because you ascended. And from that place, no one needs to understand you, because now they feel you. They feel the weight of your transformation in your gaze. They feel the authority in your restraint. They feel the sharpness in your silence. And somewhere, deep in the unconscious, they know this man is no longer like the rest. Not because he says it, but because everything around him moves differently. Opportunities bend toward him. Chaos avoids him. Energy recalibrates in his presence. Because when a man has truly ascended, he no longer pursues power. He becomes power. Not the kind that dominates others, the kind that masters himself. And that mastery is magnetic. That mastery is divine. That mastery is what makes him untouchable. Not from ego, from essence. And when your essence is pure, your path is clear. You stop performing, you stop convincing, you stop diluting your greatness just to be digestible. Because you finally understand the people meant for you don't need the explanation. They need the example. They don't need the reason. They need the reminder that it's possible to rise without fanfare, that it's possible to evolve without applause, that it's possible to become without explaining the process to everyone who chose comfort. And when you do, when you live it, breathe it, and hold it consistently, you stop trying to climb the mountain. You realize you are the mountain. So let them misunderstand. Let them question. Let them whisper. You've ascended too far to come down and clarify. You've built too much to return to explain. Because the moment you stopped explaining was the moment you started becoming everything they said was impossible. And now you move different. Now you lead different. Now you live as proof. Proof that silence is strategy, that solitude is power, that self-respect is the final currency. And when the world finally turns around and says, "We see you now," you'll smile, not because they finally noticed, but because you no longer needed them to. You noticed yourself. And that was the beginning of your ascension. And from that moment, that quiet seismic shift when you chose self over approval, you crossed a threshold that few ever dare to. Not because it's hard, but because it's final. You can never go back. Not mentally, not spiritually, not energetically. Because once you stop explaining, you stop asking to be invited. You stop seeking permission to speak your truth. You stop waiting for anyone to crown you. You realize you were the throne all along. The noise below you fades. Not because the world stopped talking, but because you stopped listening. You no longer need validation to take action. You no longer hesitate when your soul gives instruction. You no longer doubt the direction because you finally trust the source it comes from. The man who no longer explains is a man who has chosen internal supremacy over external approval. He has chosen peace over popularity. He has chosen to be feared by the false rather than liked by the lukewarm. And it is in that moment, with nothing left to prove and no one left to please, that he becomes untouchable. He becomes a force of natural order in a chaotic world, a living example that true power never has to raise its voice, because it commands by being. So let this be your final vow. No more justifying your pace. No more explaining your absence. No more softening your standard for people who never plan to rise. From this day forward, let your silence speak volumes. Let your presence bend atmospheres. Let your identity become so anchored that even storms are forced to move around you. Because your time explaining is over and your time ascending has begun. Climb, not for the view, but because staying where you were is no longer an option. And when they ask what changed, you won't answer. You'll just keep walking. You'll keep building. You'll keep rising until one day they realize you stopped explaining because you already knew exactly who you were becoming. And by then, they'll understand without words. Because the man who becomes undeniable doesn't need to announce his power. His presence confirms it. And your presence, forged in silence, shaped in solitude, will speak a language only the worthy can hear. You'll no longer move for validation. You'll move with vision. You'll no longer seek alignment through conversation, because your frequency will filter everything. You'll stop asking, am I on the right path? Because the man who stops explaining no longer asks. He decides, he directs, he declares internally. And the external world falls in line. And what you'll find is that the higher you rise, the less there is to say. Not because you've run out of words, but because you've outgrown the need to use them. Not because you are cold, but because you are complete. And that's the mark. The signature of those who've truly ascended. They move through the world, not trying to be understood, but trying to be unmistakable. Because you didn't come here to be explained. You came here to evolve, to disrupt, to transcend. And now you walk as proof. You breathe as proof. You exist as a silent revolution in a world still addicted to noise. So stop looking back. Stop sending updates to the past. Stop watering dead plants hoping they'll bloom in your new garden. This life, this identity, this frequency is yours now. It was always yours. You just had to stop explaining long enough to finally claim it. Now go. Not louder. Just higher, not faster. Just freer. Because everything you've ever wanted was waiting for the day. You stopped explaining and started ascending. And this is the silence that reshapes worlds. The moment you stepped out of the noise, the chaos didn't end, but you became unshakable in it. The confusion didn't vanish, but clarity became your compass. And every voice that once pulled at you to justify, to explain, to slow down, became just that, voices. Not commands, not truths, not gods. Just echoes of the past, fading behind the force of a man no longer concerned with convincing anyone of anything. Because now you walk with a kind of authority that can't be borrowed. You own your hours, you protect your name, you wear your scars like armor, not shame. You don't speak unless there's weight behind it. You don't move unless it's intentional. You don't spend your energy trying to prove who you are. You simply are. And in a world where everyone is explaining their way into circles they don't belong in, you've become the exception. The man who is invited into rooms because of what he embodies, not what he sells. Your energy is your introduction. Your silence is your filter. Your presence is your positioning. And now you understand. Explanation was always a form of asking. And you're done asking. You're done hoping they'll get it. You're done lowering your frequency so they feel less threatened. You're done dimming your glow to fit inside their shadows. From here on out, you're not building a life that makes sense to others. You're building a life that makes truth non-negotiable. A life that only the aligned can recognize. A life that doesn't demand you explain. Because when you live in full alignment, your existence becomes the explanation. So let the world talk. Let them wonder. Let them misunderstand. You have work to do. You have light to protect. You have ascension to embody. And none of it requires their understanding. Because from this point forward, you are no longer interested in being understood. You are only interested in being unmistakable. You are no longer waiting to be invited. You are building a kingdom that cannot be ignored. You are no longer explaining, because the world will understand. When you arrive in silence with everything they thought you'd never become, and when you arrive, not with noise, not with flash, but with unshakable presence, they won't know what to say, because you will have become what most men only imagine in quiet moments of regret. Not because you explained, but because you executed, because you endured, because you elevated. And when they finally turn to look, searching for an explanation, for a step-by-step, for a way to trace how you became what you are, there will be none. Just a man who stopped explaining and started ascending. A man who chose clarity over comfort. A man who buried the version of himself that needed permission. A man who replaced apology with authority. And when you stand there, not above them, but beyond the reach of who you used to be, you won't feel pride. You'll feel peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from being accepted. The kind that comes from never needing to be. This is the end of the explanation. And the beginning of your ascension, let them wonder. You walk